So hi, everyone. Thank you for coming in this usually very vacation week and joining us for our first Diversity Dialogues event. So this event was created by a new relaunch group called the DEI Bridge Action Council. And the DEI Bridge Action Council is the dynamic and influential force championing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging across ESMT and beyond. As a trusted partner, we foster open and courageous dialogue about different topics that matter to our community. So the history of the DEI Bridge Action Council actually comes from some years before, when it was the ILRT, Inclusive Leadership Roundtable, which many of our colleagues that are here were also part of them, and ones that are not currently here. And through this group, there were many initiatives fostered, including the creation of the position that I currently hold. And then now we decided to relaunch it with a big work last year to reconceptualize it, to create new ideas, to give it a new energy. So today we are 35 members. We meet every 2 months. We're students, staff, and recently alumni. And we are all coordinated by me, the DEI manager. And we're currently working in 3 projects. One is this event that we're doing now, Diversity Dialogue Series, in which we want to address new topics that are important in the area of the DEIB. So we're trying to create a space where we can all talk and have a dialogue and discuss what is important for us, what is important for our organization, our community, and try to leverage some initiatives, some actions, etc. We are also reviewing and updating the Gender Equality Plan. As you know, the Gender Equality Plan will finish this year, and it was a great initiative. And now we want to review how it went during these years of implementation, but also to try and propose a more open one that includes more categories beyond gender. So this is a huge work we're currently doing through analyzing the indicators and what else can be done. And the last project is related to events that are important for the DEIB. The next one will be German Diversity Day, but we are open for all other events that you might find interesting. So today we will talk, our event is called Beyond Buzzwords, the Real Impact of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. This is our first diversity dialogue. We're very happy that you join us, very grateful, because this is something where I think we can really see some perspectives and talk about the current topics. The idea of these dialogues is that we leverage our community knowledge. We are a huge, diverse community with a lot of perspectives and knowledge, and yes, we're here to talk about it. So today we have Alexander Hijmering, Principal Consultant at Harbor and alumnus of ESMT from the Executive MBA class of 2023. We are also with Rebecca Loads, our Director of ESMT's MBA programs and member of DEI Bridge. We have Xiao Zhang, Program Director of Executive Programs, and me as a moderator, who is Julieta, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager. So we decided this topic to start our DEI Bridge because, as you might know and you might heard, the concept of DEIB has had a very recent explosion in the public discourse. So everyone is talking about it. Everyone is either against it or with it. And it has become kind of a battle horse, right, of this new kind of world order that we're seeing right now in the in the current times since this year began and this new political forces came to being. So we decided to talk about this because we're very interested to go beyond this, just these buzzwords. What does it really mean? Why do they even exist? And what does it mean for us as a community, as an organization, as an European university, and as a German university? And where are we located in all this? And I would have to say that for me, it's very interesting moment because in my experience, all of a sudden this became a huge thing, and all of a sudden we are all in this, or me as specifically as the DI manager, in this kind of hurricane eye in the center of it. And I've been wondering a lot about it, about the significance of the words, about what does it mean, about performativeness, and many other things. So I think it is really great that we are here discussing this topic. I think it's very, very relevant. And it's great for taking also a stand in what is happening today. So thank you very much for being here. And I will start right now with my first question is, what does diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging mean to you, and how have these concepts guided you throughout your life? Maybe we start with Alexander, please.
Diversity, equity, inclusion means to me that everyone can be there and can be themselves, and it's really about human rights and giving everyone a seat at the table and room. So for me, it's giving other people room to bring their whole selves into the community where they are. In my case, the workplace. I've been an advocate of diversity within the workplace for the last 10 years in the legal sector in the Netherlands, which had a really don't ask, don't tell policy when it basically came to LGBT issues. And I founded the first ERG, employee resource group at a law firm in the Netherlands. And from that came a foundation which actually bound by now 37 law firms in the Netherlands to actually increase visibility and acceptance of LGBT people in the legal sector in the Netherlands. So interesting enough, I've never considered myself to be sort of a wallflower, but to be honest, when I started this activism and became more open also about my own sexuality in the broader perspective of my professional life, because I'd never combined these together, that's actually when my career also soared. So I personally experienced that it makes a huge difference if you give people agency to bring themselves.
Yes, thank you. And Xiao, please.
So maybe I just elaborate a little bit of how I arrived here, because that also shaped how I think about and why I'm here to support this topic. So I've been actually 15 years outside of China now. I'm originally from China. So after I left China, this actually broadened hugely my perspective. I start to know that actually the world just doesn't have one perspective. For people who knows Asian culture in China, who comes from that, you might know sometimes belonging actually meant more conformity, that you think the same way. And if you're not thinking the way the whole collective group thinks, you're kind of outcasted. So after I arrived in Europe, actually I'm so surprised, nicely surprised of how diverse the perspective can be on a table, and people can still be friends, let's say, after they argue very directly with each other, especially in Germany, right? So, so this is really something that gave me this insight about how to surface different perspectives and allow different perspectives around the table. That's perhaps one definition. And another thing that through my journey, being 15 years outside of China, a lot of times the only one female, maybe even Asian female on the table, I become also very sensitive and conscious of the topic of being seen and heard. And myself tries to blend in, right? And coming from China, you want to conform with all the values and behaviors, but at the same time, also want to stand out. I think that's perhaps human nature in a way, that you want to be seen, be heard as an individual human being, but you also want to feel you belong to a certain group. That is this collectivism. So how to just balance between this being seen, stand out, but at the same time feeling blending in and included, how to hold one's own authenticity, as what Alex just mentioned, own authenticity, but at the same time have this collectivism, this group feeling that going towards certain shared, because we are, if you look across the room, if you look at each other, sometimes I ask myself, do I look at as the person first as a person, or do I look at, oh, here's a German, here's a Spanish, here's a female, here's a male? That come to us automatically, but this is something we cannot avoid. But fundamentally, we are human beings and share certain common needs. So how to also identify that, but at the same time, knowing that I am different, I allow myself to stand out. I guess that's another dimension I would put on this topic.
Yes, thank you. Rebecca?
Okay, hard act to follow. I think kind of what Chao said around authenticity, that's one I think about as I think the core word is around how can each of us be in places where we can be authentic and true. So there isn't having to do a filter, a change, an edit, obviously with mutual respect. So this is not a case where everyone can say exactly, but it's effectively how can I be genuine and kind of real. But also I think another aspect of DEIB is around, for me, a really core value is around fairness and around kind of like equity and treating everyone in the same way. And it's such a fundamental piece where the assumption that if somebody is A, B, or C, that means that they have access to less or they deserve less. It's kind of that fact that education, when we're in a university, education, even you can argue business education is a wonderful opportunity that can transform. Like, we are involved in transformation of individuals and giving new opportunities. And that means that that's everybody that we need to do that for. And it really is a case where, for me, DEIB is tied up into my values, is tied up into kind of like who I am and what I expect from those around me and the workplaces. And I would like, as you know, as a gay woman in education, I've lived in 5 different countries, had very different experiences. And so being there, you're used to being kind of like, I am a privileged woman. So I've been in kind of like the in, but I've also been on the other side where I am the minority and I am the one that's kind of excluded. So it's really around how we can all learn from those perspectives and ensure that people do feel that there is a sense of authenticity, that they belong and that they're welcomed.
Yes, I would say from what you're saying that this values of fairness, of this very like thin and sometimes very fragile equilibrium between the individuality and collectivism, something that drives us, right? That also brings us to this place where we are now, as well as being active and trying to being kind of in a way forced to embody this activism, as Alexander puts it, that in a way transformed you, right? It's like when you find out that for Xiao was when you left China, and for Alexander when you started this activism that is parallel to your work also, then you find that, oh yeah, these things are important. Not just important for me as all the things that I embodied, but also for everyone. And that's why I think fairness is so important, and fairness for transformation, for accessing resources, for being able to have the same agency and way to influence the world around us. right? I totally agree with what you're saying. I think it's a great way of starting this conversation. What does it mean to us? And I also invite you that you're clearly interested in these topics to also ask yourselves how these topics have influenced your life, or how have you come to think about them in your own embodiment, your own life path. Yes. So the following question is, what is the role of language in the current discussion around DEIB, and how are words being used by whom and for what? So I will start with Rebecca this time.
Oh, I think one of the things I think we all see is how diversity is being weaponized. And so it's being used very much as it's being turned into some kind of really strong political issue, as we've seen in the US, in Germany, in Europe, versus necessarily being something that's around fundamental human rights. So diversity is assuming, or DEIB is assuming almost a very different meaning than it is. And I wonder if we need to change how we talk about it, because the fundamental principles are there, but if the words we use, and semantics are important. And so I think that the discussions around diversity also in itself means different things in different contexts. Diversity in the US, I lived in the US for a while, diversity there is very much more strongly affixed on race. And so that is where kind of, I think it has its origins, the civil rights movement, and there you feel the racial differences and the prejudice and racism in the US. But I think diversity in the German context, I think it's typically been around things like migration and integration. So that's a very different perspective. And again, in different countries. So I think that we need to think about the words we use and what it means, and recognize that there may not be one term which is able to capture everything for everybody, and that may need to kind of shift. But I'm sure we were talking a little bit about the human right versus political right earlier.
Yeah, and I think you're right there. I think that I now see also within the legal sector in the US, but also even in Europe, in response to the backlash on diversity, that they're sort of changing their language and averting certain words, mainly diversity. I don't think that the issue is in the word diversity itself, because every word we'll choose will need to be loaded, will need to be discussed, like, how do you see it, how do I feel it? I think whatever, so it's not the words we have been using until so far. Regardless of the words we would have used, they would have been weaponized. So I think you're right that it's there's a need to sort of get across that it's not just about minorities, which is very often sort of pitched when we talk about diversity. It's sort of, I think one of the main arguments against diversity is that it's sort of a reverse discrimination and sort of the total ignorance of people not having the same chances, right? So if you're privileged, you can easily say, well, everyone that can do what I do, because you don't see it. And so I don't think any of our words would have mattered, because one word doesn't capture. I think it's a story we need to tell. And it's very interesting because I actually did my thesis here at ESMT for my MBA on language that we use for advancing diversity. And we presented very much as a win-win situation. And in a sort of literally in a business kind of way. It's literally called the business case for diversity. And that maybe some people feel that it's not about them, because it's very much focused around giving people who are a minority a voice. And so maybe people who are privileged and in the majority and who are not experiencing any of that sort of feel left out. So I think there's a greater story to be told. And I think the word fairness is a very good one, because fairness feels close to everyone. It's a value that everyone can relate to. So maybe because words do matter, and we still need words to describe stuff, and maybe it's not one word, but maybe it starts, the story that we need to start telling, it starts with the word fairness. And there are very interesting voices on diversity who are arguing for using new language to describe what we're all feeling, that I believe may include everyone, because it speaks to everyone. And I think fairness and human rights are part of these values that could do the trick.
And when you mentioned about feeling, actually, I'm also wondering this backlash, whether this is also expressing fear from the other side, right? So everything happens for a reason in a way. So what gives rise to this backlash? It's also a certain needs, perhaps unmet, certain fear that was expressing there. That's just when I hear that feeling that came to me. And I agree with you that I think the words here are really exploited. This just again helps us to understand how pale sometimes words are, right? Like I'm not a native speaker. I might just speak something. I think I'm speaking this meaning, but actually you interpret the other meaning. That's very, very true, very totally true. So again, back to, I think it's a good chance for us to drive back to why we're doing that, to the purpose of it. Because if you look at a backlash, it's starting from constitutional policy setting, all this really power, but also very visible things that you can target on. But it's not looking at why we need to, let's say, do, I even don't have a better word, do DEIB or whatever that we want to frame it. So we need to go back. I think there's a good chance for us to really think about why, what are the purpose apart from business. I think it's back to human, that we need to bring human back to the organization, to the world, and look at everybody as human, not just as an asset too, right? To measure effectiveness, to fill certain quota. I was before in the corporate also doing DEI program. I can already sense the resistance from right certain group that this is not relevant for them. So how can we tell a story that is actually relevant for them? And then you also mentioned about tell the story, and I think every one of us could grab this chance to tell our story, to use a grassroots approach as well, to against those top-down policy kind of approach.
Yeah, totally. I think everything that you were saying actually interconnects the significance, what does it mean for each cultural and social context, and also the fact that many times people who oppose these initiatives actually do not see themselves as holders of diverse elements within their communities, right? And that they see like, yeah, the diverse, let's say, quote unquote, are these minorities, but not me. And I think it's being also forgotten all of these other social categories that exist, that are there kind of invisible, and that people who are against it also like kind of suffer from them, but they're just like afraid, as you say, of in this delicate equilibrium between individual and collectivism. They sometimes want to be like part of the collectivism maybe, or like to be not seen as different, because in the uprising idea of the different is dangerous, is scary, is a threat.
Yeah, sort of what you're now saying is triggering with me when I first sort of literally threw a stone in the pond in the law firm, telling that I was going to start a pride alliance within the firm, which was a sort of a shock. I had really interesting coffee machine conversations with colleagues who very honestly came up with me. And you have to know, in the Netherlands, Dutch firms are sort of like a monoculture. Everyone's white, everyone went to sort of the same universities, they have the same sort of background. So it's not just race, it's they have a lot of the same things. And so they came to me and they said, Alex, I hear what you say, but I don't really understand it. So that was really vulnerable. And they literally asked me, what do you want me to do differently? Because they understood that there was a thing going on. And it's really interesting because when I sort of understood what othering is and explained it to them, they sort of realized that they also at some points were different than others. So I had a young lawyer of 26 who had kids. None of the other lawyers at his age have kids. So he felt different because he wouldn't go to the bar after work. Everyone else does. I had a lawyer who has a foster child, and she constantly feels the need to sort of come out when people assume it's her own child. And so she feels the need to correct people. So people understand it, but you have to explain how being different is. And also, I think that the true question, which I always come back to, is how? Because it was a true question. What do you want me to do differently? So there are a lot of people who want this, who want to be fair, who see that, who want the same, but they don't know how. So I think we've been putting a lot of energy in explaining why this is really important. And there's two things. We haven't convinced the people who were against it anyway, but we also haven't given agency to the people who wanted to change because they had no idea what to do. So actually my thesis, it shows that the argumentation around why, which could be a business case for diversity or the equity case for diversity, talking about why doesn't help people further. It's maybe we should change our talking about how we can do it. And I think storytelling is a great example of how we could do it. Like, how could we help people to get the same chances?
I think building on the how as well is around things you can change as one thing, one person, but it's also around how you demonstrate that on a daily basis, how you live it.
Yes.
And how it's lived by your organization.
Absolutely.
So it can't be, so the how is very much, we can all do what we can individually, but it's when we come together and demonstrate how we support each other. So it's around allyship as well.
Absolutely.
It's around speaking up, not staying silent. It's around showing support. Even if you yourself may not be directly impacted, it's seeing, opening eyes.
Absolutely, because I think that the big changes, of course, in the majority. It's the people who are not affected by being a minority. And so they are the ones that have the biggest shift to make. And I understand it's very difficult to see, right? Because it took me taking on activism on LGBT visibility within my own organization. And then I had a conversation with a female partner from our New York office. And only in that conversation, when she referred to how I felt at my first baby steps at activism, did I realize that she knew exactly how I was feeling, because she as a woman had been feeling that for decades. And I thought, if it takes me this much to understand this, even though I'm a minority, I was a bit daunted and thought, how are we going to explain this to majority members who are not, who don't feel or cannot allure to this feeling of minority? So I understand there's a task for us to make people understand like how they are different, because it's what we do, but it's also how we agree to live together, right? Because a lot of the inequality is very systematic and it's not purposely, and that makes it very difficult, because basically you're telling people, or they feel that you're doing it wrong, but they don't know why, and they don't do it on purpose, and that's why they feel it's difficult. But there's a lot of diversity research which actually shows that inequality perpetuates itself, especially in the business sense. So the reason why my law firm is so monoculture is that basically what we're selecting, because that's who we look at, how people speak, where they went to college, how they move, what their background is. That's what we look for, rather than, because we don't know how to assess quality differently, basically, because it's intangible. And we don't know that that is working, that those systems, but they do. And so doing things differently also must be part of being aware of how we can do it differently. And yeah, that's a difficult question. We can't resolve it today, but I would like to advocate in thinking more about how, rather than,
I was sorry, just as I was thinking, in a certain sense, one of my favorite expressions is we judge our own intentions and other people's behavior. So our own intentions are the why. We think, well, I was only doing it because of this. And yet if someone, say, closes the door in our face, we judge the behavior, even though there may be something. And that's, in a sense, the how and the why. So we kind of want to persuade on intention, but actually it's the what we're doing, the behavior that we see, that is where you see, because that is what other people see and they copy or emulate.
Yes, no, totally. I agree. And I also think in this road to allyship, let's say, or to mainstream equality and fairness, it's also very important, I would say, the embodiment of it. Because when you express your example with your colleague and then you said, oh yeah, I feel like we're feeling the same, it is something that it's very, very hard to rationalize. Like when you are assigned, for example, female, and you are treated by society as a female, and with all the implications this has, it also brings, like, it's behind your mind constantly, and you are feeling it, you have the feelings, and it takes time to review what you're going through and then say, oh yeah, I can now rationalize it. And I think this is the hardest part to communicate to others who have different life experiences. How do you explain to someone who was born here what to be a migrant is? It's really, really hard because it's something that you have to live through to really have the grasp of it. But from my perspective, I think it's just kind of nurturing the value of listening to each other and to understanding, as you say, that not the world doesn't exist just the way I see it. And it is for everyone from every background, I think.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And at the same time, with that knowledge, I also think we need to acknowledge that there's going to be a part of people who will never share our point of view about these things, regardless of how well they listen, because in their mind, there's a natural order which places men above women. Straight people is the only part that should be existing. So they have sort of a natural order thing, which is very difficult to rationalize or convince with sort of arguments with emancipation, because they don't believe there's any that there's getting away from that. And so I believe we should focus on the people who do want, because I think they are in the majority. There are people who want to be fair for all, and we should focus on that. And I think in the debate, of course, because there's such harsh words being spoken, there's a lot of attention going to these people, whereas I think there's lots of people sort of in the middle who would be very perceptive of the story that we just talked about, and redefining what we actually meant all this time.
Yeah. Of course, I also think it's important, because still coming back to what I said in the beginning, that diversity for me is to really allow different perspective on the table. But we are civil enough to listen to each other, to understand each other, and to find a common ground to reach certain solution. I think that's for me the ideal situation. And sometimes how we can include those people more in our conversation. For example, I'm actually very proud. I'm a co-founder of a women network. It's now being established as a nonprofit association here. It's supporting Chinese female in Germany to develop their professional life and work. And I started this in the beginning, really just having Chinese female in my group. And we have really lively conversations, but we actually didn't realize there's something missing. There are different perspectives on the things we're discussing. And lately, there are members coming in as male, and I notice they are actually minority there. and the women start to kind of really, I wouldn't say attack, again, apologize, words are pale, but they're having such emotion to bring all those, what they've lived through, to those poor males and kind of fight back in a way. And that's where I start to realize, oh, this community perhaps is not the most healthy if we only have female and certain kind of opinion. So we now mindfully also to include more male into the conversation, into the organizing of the events, because really there are different perspectives that we, perhaps with our experiences and nature, we didn't think of. It's not just about male and female. I know this, I'm really simplify labeling it, and we would sometimes like to label people. It's just like so easy. But what I'm trying to say is how to also include and allow people with different opinions and try to understand and see how we can come up with relevant story for them, like the 24-year-old person who has a kid. I can empathize how difficult it might be for him sometimes to say that. Yeah.
I think society is moving those. One of the things with social media, the thing is that having a lovely broad discussion where people disagree and present different opinions is being eradicated because it doesn't sell. It doesn't get clicks on social media. It's basically everything needs to be a binary. It needs to be a black or a white. It needs to be the extremes. And I think that's one thing that we're really losing. And that really worries me. The ability to hold diverse opinions, different opinions in the same space, and to listen to each other to actually understand the different perspectives.
Exactly.
And that goes way beyond this. I think it's just an observation, a depressing observation on society in general, which I think that as educators, actually, we have a role in helping to our students, our staff, our community to actually engage in those discussions, to break out of our little bubbles, to effectively develop a kind of a broader perspective on something.
Yes, totally.
And it's really interesting, right? Because we're at the right spot for that. Because my experience coming to ESMT, which I mean, of course, I come from much closer than you, because I'm Dutch, so it's very close to German. However, my class was coming from very different countries. Only 1/3 was German, 2/3 were non-Germans. And it's really interesting how different those perspectives can be, even though all of us had a lot of similarities. I mean, the fact that we're here tells you that there were. But still within that, there was a lot of differences because we had different experiences in our careers as being a migrant within Germany, even on a professional level, being quite young within our class, and a female. It's really interesting how I did not expect to be so diverse within people who, at first glance, if you look at our class picture, are so similar. But like you said, because during that time in the work groups, you get time and you're pushed to work together and listen to each other and come up with a communal standpoint, or at least share your opinions. And it's really interesting because it's when you take the time to sit down and discuss, that's when you really understand how different people are, even if they look similar. And it's when you really start appreciating that. And you don't have to resolve it, but it still sometimes triggers my mind. Interesting enough, I was in a study room downstairs before we started because I had a call. But it's a study room I had a lot of discussions in. I sent a picture to my working group because I have such fond memories of that. So it would be great if we could keep that and sort of, other than yelling an opinion to each other, really listen and sort of, see if you can find something that triggers your thoughts.
Yes, definitely. And I think the concept of belonging actually is that where you are part of a place where you can kind of let your guard down and show, even though you look very similar, or you've been for a long time performing in a way that makes you be part of a group, then you can lower that shield and be like authentic and build with others and talk with others.
It's having the difficult, not shying away from having the difficult conversation. That's where the magic happens. And it's interesting, there's even academic studies showing that a group that has the mindset of listening to each other and going into the difficult conversation, but really listening to each other, they are actually the most successful in getting the most out of being different.
And another part of this question was, by whom and for what this language and this simplification of the discourse is being used? What do you think?
By whom?
By whom and for what is it being simplified this way or weaponized this way?
Well, from my 2 cents, I definitely can see that's the power play in a way, right? So who have decided that those are people at jurisdiction power? They can just change a lot of things with the resources they have. And for what, which I also can sense is could link with current economic downturn. Resources are getting scarce, and then, you know, how you can then start to push more resources to the people you feel are beneficial and to you and all that. So this, again, back to, I think, to the fear that this backlash has shown. What for me a reflection is then, again, we don't have enough different voices at the power table. They're just very similar people making that decision. And that for sure then lead to this backlash, this one direction that we're going.
Yeah, I sometimes see it as like these old style video games where you come to the end of a level, and before you could level up, you have to fight the biggest monster.
Yeah.
And when you engage it, you think you're never going to beat it, but eventually you always do. And sort of, I think you're right. I think it is being weaponized for the benefit of people wanting to hold on to privilege. And so it's also taken away the light on what's happening in the side of the stages. So in my own industry, the legal sector, big law firms have been targeted by the Trump administration and basically trying to dictate who they can and cannot represent. So it's actually going into having a fair system and the judiciary and attacking that. But since they combined it with pressuring these law firms out of their DEI programs, that's where all the attention goes to, because it's an easy story, because it's tangible. And it apparently appeals to fear that people had. So it was easy to sort of stir that up. Whereas the real problem, of course, is that it's about human rights. So it's about everyone's rights, not just about minorities. And it's about getting fair process. But no one is talking about fair process anymore. So I think it's also a distraction theory. And that's why it's stirred up so much.
Yeah. What do you think, Rebecca?
I don't know if I can add any more, actually, because I think it's really a case of, I'm thinking about the performative dimension, actually, because all of this is noise, and it's an easy target, which effectively has been seen as the low-hanging fruit around. I know that there is, if you look at the kind of the populism that's uprising, and in terms of people feeling that they are missing out, and so therefore there is a creation of the group of the other who have been stealing my resources, which is how often it's debated. I mean, you've seen in the US the challenges that they made to Harvard's kind of equal admission policy that would actually try and correct some of the systemic inequalities which existed, and yet they kind of like challenged against it, saying, "Oh, I'm a poor white man, I can't get into the college of my choice because you reserve seats." So I just see that there is the noise, and then also I really get umbrage, and I really kind of get upset at the organizations that kind of like seem to just roll over and go like, okay, I'm going to drop a principle, because it's like, if dropping DEI was so bloody easy, were you really ever committed to it? Because that would be the question. And it's not as though there are some companies in the US who have held firm. They have kind of said, actually, no, we commit to this. I think Costco shareholders, 98% voted against they tried to kind of get DEI removed, and they just said, no effing way. So therefore, this is the piece where it's the organizations which are prepared to roll back, which is like, was it really something that mattered to you in the first place? And therefore, is that somewhere an organization I would want to go and be part of, or I would want to do business with? So in a sense, maybe it's been set up as kind of being smoke and mirrors, but is this actually going to have a much bigger impact in terms of where those organizations, the business that they get?
Yeah, of course, because it's very fear driven, right? Because these firms cave because they sort of see that they can't exercise their work anymore, because they're not granted any access to government buildings and stuff, and clients were also targeted, so they're fearing losing clients. But the problem is, and other firms are actually sort of caving in before they're actually targeted, but this preemptive obedience is actually showing people like this how far they can go and how easy it is. So actually, the correct answer would be to stand together. And luckily, there are law firms who've done that. There's 500 firms backing one of the larger firms who is fighting in court. I think the academia is doing a great job. Harvard is standing up, but apart from Harvard, there's many universities are making a sort of a NATO pact that if one of them is targeted, they'll all fight back. And I think that's the answer to this. You need to show that, you need to find alliances and do this together, because it's a minority that fights against this. Yes, they're making a lot of noise. Yes, they're getting out a lot of threats. But if we don't show that we're still a majority in thinking that things could be different and should be different, then that minority will get its way. It doesn't take a majority to have this opinion to be effective on us all.
Yeah, I think it brings the question of what is a majority, what is a minority, right? When you all stand together and it's like, well, we exist, first of all, we take a stand, we decide what is better or what, like, to defend human rights, fairness, and equity, etc. And so we have diving into this question also, what do you think organizations and institutions can do in the face of this pushback to ensure sustainable fairness, equity, inclusion, and belonging? So you already gave us a tip.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no, but yes. But on top of it,
I think one thing is definitely keep doing such dialogue, keep listen, keep creating a space where people could civilly discuss different opinions and find common ground, understand each other. I think this is the fundamental to let the DEIB start to grow again, or whatever word we want to put around it.
yes.
I would say things like reporting, set an example by reporting. I mean, I think in the UK, it's actually a legal requirement that firms employing more than 250 people have to report on pay by gender and also by race. I know race is voluntary, gender is required. I think there are things which, if your organization firmly believes in this, then you should be transparent and open about you, yourself, and also those organizations you work with. So, you know, as part of a standard RFP, I think with the executive clients we have to submit around kind of our sustainability reporting. You know, there's a lot of focus on the ESG reporting around the E, but what about the S and the G? How much do we talk about who we are or organizations are? How do we select our partners so that they uphold our values, so that we gain, there is that collective power where actually it helps drive the business case. So it's not, I think that there is, I know the business case of DEI or business case of inclusion, there are benefits, definitely. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. But I think kind of how can organizations themselves clearly demonstrate their value and make it part of what do they stand for? What are the goals? So around the accountability and measures, so that it doesn't just become lip service of like, we welcome everybody. Yes, we're a lovely place to work. That it's actually illustrated in how employees feel in terms of engagement surveys, in terms of what you see, in terms of staff retention, advancement, pay. So I would say really kind of opening up the books and being what you wish to work for.
Yeah.
We talked to you because you've done this in HR.
Right. Yeah. But on the other side, I also think because you had a question before, what's missing out in the discussion, I think we need to rethink how we put data to DEIB to avoid that it becomes quota filling, because that's the biggest argument that the other opinions are holding. So how can we do that while creating transparency? That's what I'm hearing you really holding organizations, companies accountable and linking that to their growth, to their innovation, and see how that could also trigger more reflection and conversations in the bigger public.
I think it's also in terms of the quotas as well. It's like, you know, we are part of the Financial Times ranking. The Financial Times ranking, they evaluate the school based on how many women are on your board. We don't look at things like international diversity. They don't look at other measures. It's very much that some of these are around kind of like gender quotas versus the intersectionality of differences. It's always, you know, even the women on boards is like, let's have a woman on the board, everything will do better. Not let's represent diverse voices. So it's actually, let's not just get a privileged middle-class white woman onto the board. Let's actually look at bringing in genuinely different perspectives so that we are seeking to learn with and from each other.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that again, my central question is, what are we going to do? So there's a lot of discussion and a lot of panic, sort of, and it's understandable because there's a lot of noise. But now we're being shown that for a lot of companies, it was very performative what they were doing. It's also very debatable what they were doing in the first place was very effective. There's quite a lot of academic research showing that everything that I, at least until I started my thesis, thought was incredibly effective, like unconscious bias training, can actually be counterproductive. And so the question is, what are we going to do? And indeed, how we're going to measure or going to look whether it's effective. And I mean, measuring is one. It could also be, but you need to be very aware that it's not your focal point and that you don't think, well, that's 50% women and we're done. So that there is a pitfall to being in the numbers. I do agree they're helpful to steer, but the question is, what are we going to do and sort of stick to that? So I think that ESMT revising their gender equality plan and also making it broader to other sort of differences, I think is a great example because it tells us it's a plan. What are we going to literally do? And I mean, events like this are important, but the change is going to come from that. So that's my thing. What are we going to do? How?
Yeah, huge question. I want to know if any of the audience has a question or has something to contribute also.
Hey, hello, can you? Yeah, you can. I'm Aslı. My pronouns are she, her. Thank you for holding this space for this discussion. I have a like comment / question, sort of. I really like listening your approach, Alexander, about like how we should focus on people who actually want to contribute fairness and equality rather than reject fully. But also, I also think about like how power is at hands of like these decision makers who might also reject such things fully. So, what are the ways to, you know, walk that road to like for actual transformation? For example, you know, we always use terms as like female and male in business world, even though these are terms that define sex and not gender, and there are gender expressions beyond that, like different pronouns and non-binary / trans people. But for in administrative world, for example, we categorize, like we have a gender sheet and an Excel sheet, and we categorize male, female, and that's all. And I am not gonna do an extensive research to find out if this person online, like openly came out as diverse gender. But in the end, I feel like this maybe this is not weaponization, this is only simplification of things. But in the end, this might be very much an excluding habit in some institutions. And thinking about like my you know, friends who have different, you know, gender expressions, and thinking about how you know, they wouldn't feel included in such environments. They wouldn't come to that point even to be considered maybe to be here, and such things. Like, if I don't know if I could manage to summarize my points, but it's just a comment / question, how to make it keep the business efficient, but also maybe because all the applicants are male and female, and their internal understanding of gender corresponds to their sex assigned at birth, but maybe some are not, and maybe this whole idea also hinders things. Just, yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Well, I think it's very interesting and also valid. I think that any representation of reality is, of course, a simplification. So whenever we do research or make statistics, there's no, we can't touch all the things of reality. I think in your example, I think the correct question is it useful to do this? So, for instance, I've asked for years to, I work in the IT part of law firms. I've always asked, why do we actually ask people's gender? What's the use? I mean, do we really need this? Because I had this discussion about gender years ago already, because there were two options. And the only reason is because we want to say, dear sir or dear madam. Okay, so if we just say, dear Alexander, did we solve it? And can we just get away with it? Because the question is, a simplification of the reality is always necessary when you try to get data or when you gain insights. But is it still useful to do it? And if it doesn't gain you new insights, then maybe this is not the right metric. And maybe you shouldn't even gather it.
Yeah, I will also add to that in the specific example about transness and non-binary, that it is also like hugely weaponized right now, right? In the way that as if they like this other way of seeing are taking away something from cisgender people, let's say. But then this solution is like, is it even a factor? Is it even a variable for what we want to achieve, really? Really, do we need it? Or is it this driven by the fear of the existence of a different way of being human, let's say? And is this focusing on this discussion actually fueling such fear or such pushback against this? So yeah.
And I want to add on, because you mentioned about this point of power. I think recently I'm studying the topic power because I'm having actually two very interesting top programs with power. One is called Women in Power. The second is called Persuasion Power Politics. And to be very honest, I wasn't a person that is very fond of power in politics. Otherwise, I probably would not be sitting here. But just because creating this program, I started to really rethink of my relationship and my definition of power. And is power really dirty, manipulative? Can we rethink of power and use it for the good? For the book I'm reading from Jeffrey Pfeffer, he has a sentence which really stuck with me, is if we want power to be used for good, we need more good people to start understand and use it. So perhaps we also can reflect about how can we use more power to create that, to even go to a power position, so that we can bring our intention more to something that is more influential.
Yeah. So that would be the opposite of sort of getting back into our shell underneath all this noise, but do the opposite and get out there and get into positions where you can influence people, or just by being in places where you normally wouldn't be. Because I think this fear of different people is also unknown. I mean, we see the biggest xenophobia in the Netherlands is in communities which actually have no foreigners or anyone who wasn't born there.
Ignorance, isn't
ignorance.
it?
So also going out there and being us and just being part of society is also a form of exercising power on a small scale. Maybe.
Yeah, of course.
Sorry.
Like that. Oh, okay. Oh, thanks. Okay, I have a question regarding fairness in DEI. So I have like a rather long question, I'm sorry, but also was a little bit of background. I'm coming with a background of tourism, and while I was studying tourism, it was really interesting how historically, tourism went from mass tourism to a little bit of like individualized, like packages, for example, or like the way people are traveling, it's a little bit more individualized. Also, like nowadays, the individualization is also kind of like promoted by different companies and apps, like the way apps are using algorithms that are like customized to different customers. And I wanted to ask you in this regard, like how do you ensure, or like it's like two questions maybe in one. What is fairness for you? Like if we come back to basics, what is fairness for you individually? Because like how do you ensure fairness? Also, how you say it, ensuring and respecting the differences of people, like considering the differences of people, how do you stay fair? Because like for me as a person working in HR, I work with people, and sometimes I'm asking myself, is it fair to treat everyone the same, or is it fair to recognize the situations of people and also making an exception for them? So what is fairness for you, to sum up?
Fairness for me is around, it's weird because I'm going to say with treating people in order to address historic injustices. And so effectively, because I think it probably touches more on equity, it's the fact that I think it's unfair to have two individuals who have very, very different life stories and have had very different experience and opportunities to hold them exactly. I think it's very much, and I realize that this is quite murky water and quite messy water in the sense of it, fairness, the easy answer to fairness is like, well, everyone gets exactly the same, because then it's there. But I also think that, unfortunately, that would be perfect if we all had grown up in the same way, same economic background, same natural environment, same opportunities, and then we chose our way, and that is patently false. And so many things are stacked up against members of our society. And so for me, fairness is actually recognizing that and adjusting and behaving accordingly. So it's not an easy answer. And to be honest, there's also part of me that's kind of like, is this how I would like to be treated? So there is, it's a kind of like, if someone did this to me, how would I feel if I was them? And there is an element there. And I realize that that sounds quite self-interested, but I think sometimes it helps to think about the other and then evaluate it on that basis. And it's things like, in our programs, across the MBA programs, we have people representing an enormous diversity of backgrounds that come in. We are looking for people that meet a certain baseline bar in order things like able to cope with the academic rigor of the program, but the most fundamental is all around attitude and behaviors. And so some of the things which we are selecting on, you wouldn't necessarily say, well, it's not fair to select on that, because it's like, actually, we want people that will live our values and be active members of our community and will uphold and support each other. And that's fundamentally important, even though it may not necessarily be kind of like a quantifiable on the fairness factor.
I will actually come from another angle, is there real fairness, right? If we are adult enough, we know there's no real fairness in the world. That's just the fundamental how the world operates. And then fairness, I think, is also two sides. One side is definitely, right, HR, the decision maker side, but also I was told as a kid already, we have a saying in China that the crying babies gets more milk. So how much you are actually showing what is my value, how much you bring yourself into that to let the decision maker to get more full information to make that decision. I think that's also just really everything. I think it's a dual responsibility. It's never one-sided. And then for me, maybe building on your point, fairness is, for me, it's also, apart from being like really seen, heard, knowing that I was given a chance, right? It's also about transparency, that I know how the decision is made. What's the process? Why somebody is selected and not me? And if I'm really seeing that rational thing behind, or even sometimes know the emotional side, because we don't just make decisions rationally, right? I know, okay, this guy maybe is a good friend of that person. Okay, that's right. That's how I perhaps lose the bid or position. But if I cannot really see that transparency, how decision is made, then I perhaps will also not feel that's fair enough.
Yeah, I also think there's a very different idea about what's being fair. I think in Western Europe, we think treating everyone the same is fair. I think, and here, when I first went to Asia, I was very surprised by bargaining. It felt incredibly unfair that I had to pay a different price. And it took me a lot of bargaining to understand that because of my position and my wealth, you could look at it from a very different perspective. So it's not that we all pay the same, it's from the different perspective, what can you pay? And I think that's how I'd like to maybe answer your question about fairness. Like, in the end, when I bought something, it sort of both treated us. I didn't pay a leg and an arm in my position, and they were getting more and getting better because they could. And it's fair because, I mean, they had less, so none of us lost and both of us gained something. So I think, and it's sometimes find it difficult because it's so ingrained in me. Like, if I don't get the same as you, it's unfair. But then I always think of these bargaining things and thinking, hey, but maybe I got this because I'm privileged in another way and I got my step up. It's easier for me to get there. And so maybe someone else needed this break, or someone else needed this, I don't know, cut on their tuition. It all helps to get the right people in the room to do something. Because actually, I think treating everyone the same is has got us where we are. Because that's when the most privileged people end up in the room. And so those are the people in power.
Yeah. That's done.
First of all, thank you so much for the discussion. It's very thought-provoking. As someone who's also from China, I think what Chao said really speak to me, especially when we talk about as Chinese people, we're looking for conformity, but also we're looking for opportunities to stand out. So my question is also around this. It may make me sound like I'm like playing devil's advocate, because sometimes if you go for diversity like a lot, sometimes efficiency can be compromised, and this is a something very like it just happened to me during, for example, like during study groups. If you have a lot of different opinions, sometimes it's harder for us to deliver results before deadline. But also, I understand how important diversity is, but it's also like an issue there. You have to have conformity at some point to make sure things can deliver. And also, we are seeing from the headlines that sometimes, like in the States, Democrats can be under attack because people think they're too fragmented, because they have different opinions on this, while Republicans maybe too, sometimes they're binary, but also they are kind of like they are doing things instead of just talking. So I don't know. There seems like there's a trade-off between diversity and conformity. What is your opinion on this? And I don't know if I understand definitely diversity is important, but diversity and conformity, how do you strike a balance between these two?
There's actually quite a lot of academic research into indeed conformity and diversity and how they affect productiveness, and especially on the team level. And so diverse teams have been sort of associated with heightened levels of performance, but also they end up at the lower spectrum. So the most important thing is what you do within the team. And to get those results, but also what you do it for. So indeed, research says that if you have like a monotone task and executing stuff, it's easier to have people who are very like-minded. Could also, you could miss a completely blank spot because all of you are so the same. And sort of the discourse is that if you need more creative stuff, you need more diverse teams. I'm not really sure if I agree with that. I think what you need to do is, yes, you need to stop discussing at some point, but I also believe you should have a safe environment in which people can speak up. You make a decision that's transparent, everyone has their say, and then you continue. And I think that a decision is always more valid if you've heard everyone, even if it's difficult and takes you very close to your deadline, because otherwise you're executing and then maybe just before the deadline you discover that you missed something huge. So I think it's more about the psychological safety within teams. That makes a difference in how well it's paying off that you are different.
I think kind of building on that as well, it's around, you know, how you're making decisions as a group. So as always with anything, it's the kind of the divergent thinking, and that's when diverse teams really come into their own, because that's where you get your ideas. But then how as a group are you going to decide and then say, once we've decided collectively, we then accept that? Because that's that listening, is that process, and you're benefiting from everything. But it's also around how are we going to think about how we work together, which I would argue should happen whether your team is homogenous or heterogeneous, because this is around how we can collectively work with each other, because diversity may not necessarily just be a pure, you know, we talked a little bit about intersectionality. There are many different types of diversity, some of which show and some of which don't. And so I would argue that all teams are diverse. The level may be different. So I would say in terms of that, it's like conformance, I kind of like, there's something about that word that it triggers some negative reaction. I think it's because of school uniforms, I don't know, you know, because conformance for me means kind of like you have to conform to something versus finding agreement or finding converging around something that you can all align around.
And
so maybe that's
doing it.
Yes,
and
then
I think
doing
that's
it.
that's why I totally agree with you. And I also sometimes feel that in the DEI community, it sometimes happens. We're so busy sort of defining the right stuff and finding the right words and not forgetting anyone that we end up discussing a lot, not necessarily ever agreeing, but then not doing anything. And that's, I think, where we could really also, not just the Democrats, but also people who love progress, decide, okay, what can we agree upon? Then that's the thing we're going to be doing. I might have even further ideas going even further or even better, but let's do this because this is now reachable. So yeah, I agree.
Exactly, this open discussion, I think it's very important. And also, again, as we mature, we can allow these polarities or paradox, right? In one way, this discussion, diversity, embracing different ideas towards, well, conformity. Again, I understand your question because we come from similar culture, but conformity, but also really action doing that. That's kind of like a yin and yang. You allow them to exist together, but this is coming from experience and also your team growing together and learning together to see how you maintain this balance. It's not about when to use what, but it's about really right to allow them together, but to learn from all the experiences when you're as a team.
Okay, we can keep the conversation. Thank you so much for your time, for these great insights, and thank you all for coming. We now invite you to have some snacks at the Vandergang, and also we have some ideation boards so you can write what you think. And we would like us to tell us what would you like to see in the upcoming dialogues, but also what would you like to see at ESMT as initiatives around DEIB. And yes, once again, thank you so much for your time. We could keep talking about this forever. Sadly, we have limited time resources, but yes, thank